morning, everyone, and thank you to Dr. Rudra and Oncology Forum for this invitation. It's my pleasure to be here, and I have to back up a fantastic talk by Dr. SVS Dev. I prepared about 5 cases that bring out the various nuances of management of these patients and also bring into light the recent evidence. So, the first case is on PMP. This is one case that I presented 2 years ago at our World Congress in Paris, and I've presented it several times here as well. But it is one case that brings out all the nuances of PMP very well. So, this is a 53-year-old lady who had progressive abdominal distension and weight loss of 7 kg over 6 months. She is of average build, height, and weight. This is the CT scan which showed mucinous ascites with peritoneal deposits, bilateral ovarian metastasis, and a primary tumor in the appendix. A TrueCut biopsy showed a low-grade mucinous carcinoma peritonei. The CA was 45. So this is just a short video of the imaging findings. You can see there is disease almost everywhere. The small bowel is pushed up to one side by the large ovarian masses and the mucinous deposits. So, to those who can answer this question, I would like to ask, what is the role of a biopsy in such a patient? You know, our panelists, would you perform a biopsy for this patient, and what would be your reason for performing a biopsy? Whether you would do it to confirm a malignancy, determine the grade, or both. And many a times you just end up aspirating mucin. So any comments on that?
Dr. Rama, Dr. Rama is there?
I think this seems to be a very interesting case to me. And the way you have come up, because naturally, whatever the kind of the scenario is that this is involving the entire peritoneal cavity, almost you can say the majority of it. And this, there is high suspicion that this is the mucinous, maybe the kind of the tumor. But what were basically, you know, the tumor markers in this particular case? Actually, any kind of the specific markers which you know?
CA was 45, CA 99 was 144, and CA 125 was also around 100.
CEA was how much?
45.
Yeah. So I think in such cases we should rule out, you know, we should consider the colonoscopy as well as the upper GI endoscopy. Would like to rule out if there is any kind of the primary GI. And as you said, that there is a mass but it is difficult to determine on whatever the images you have shown, whether it is the appendicular tumor or otherwise you can say it is the ovarian tumor which is extending to that of the peritoneum. This is the way of yes. And after excluding the primary GI, in that case, I think I would like to go for the decision whether we can go ahead with that of the primary surgical cytoreduction or not.
Yeah.
After the assessment, it is better to go for the primary surgical cytoreduction rather than taking the biopsy. Biopsy should be taken only when we are assuming that yes, there is a role of the neoadjuvant chemotherapy in such cases. So one can take biopsy because it is a very, you can say it is involving almost the entire peritoneal cavity. There is no harm in it to prove what exactly the kind of the pathology it is. If it is low grade, I think the neoadjuvant chemotherapy should not be considered, and it is very much, I think, the kind of the case where we can go for the primary surgical cytoreduction.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because a lot of times if you aspirate from one place, it is low grade and it is a heterogeneous disease. Another region may have a high grade, but then to prove to the patient and go ahead with a major surgery, you may need to do a biopsy. So whether to operate or not may not depend much on the biopsy. In this patient, the colonoscopy was normal and the radiologist could see a primary in the appendix.
Okay.
So these are some other images, and this is the disease around the pota.
Mhm.
So you can see the pota is completely encased by the mucinous deposits.
Yes. So this actually the clinical picture gives the suspicion of the mucinous disease in this. In this.
Yes. Yes. So there is one question on how to decide whether the portal disease is resectable or not. So I quote one paper which says that if the adipose tissue around the pota on imaging is well preserved, then there is no mucinous infiltration of the structures of the pota and the disease is operable. So in this case, there was no infiltration. There were no other overt signs of inoperability like urological involvement, extensive small bowel involvement, and extensive gastric involvement. The other parameters were good, so we decided to go ahead with surgery. And in low grade PMP, it is usually extensive small bowel involvement that precludes a complete cytoreduction.
Right.
So the next step, I think we are all very clear. We'll go ahead with CRS and if possible, HIPEC. I don't think anybody would opt for NACT for this particular patient.
True.
So we went ahead with surgery. The PCI was 28, total parietal peritonectomy, glycinectomy, resection of omental bursa, mesenteric nodules, right hemicolectomy, LAR, TH, VSO, splenectomy, distal pancreatectomy. So one question I would like to ask is, how do you address the liver? If you see this is disease infiltrating the liver parenchyma. So there are two techniques of doing it. Either you could use the finger technique, which is called a digital glycinectomy. You go blunt and strip off the liver capsule, or you could electrocoagulate the disease. But in this, you run the risk of running into the hepatic veins. So for this particular case, I would opt for a digital glycinectomy. What you do is incise the liver capsule at one point, put your finger inside and strip off the entire capsule. It leads to a lot of bleeding. You have to pack it and let it be, and the bleeding stops on its own. HIPEC was also.
So just to interrupt, so
Yeah.
how do you decide the first point of entry of the finger? So what we usually do with a Veress needle, we inject one place some air and create a plate. Then we inside the glycerin. Then we put the finger. That is our technique actually.
Yeah, so I think near the attachment of the falciform around segment 4, that's a good region to enter. You almost always get a plane over there. And if there is only, if the glycerin is not diffusely involved, then you can go close to the disease. The capsule will be thickened around the deposits and it's easier to get a plane in that region. So in this patient, we performed HIPEC for 90 minutes with mitomycin C. A diverting ileostomy was performed. Many a times, even with 2 anastomosis, we do not perform an ileostomy, but because this procedure was very extensive, stoma was done. So the next question, of course, which HIPEC drug will you use? We have a lot of regimens that are recommended for PMP. Nowadays, most people have stopped using high dose oxaliplatin. One, because the PRODIGE 7 is negative, and second, and more importantly, because it leads to a lot of morbidity. The bowel toxicity, hemorrhagic complications, all of them are more with oxaliplatin. This is Wake Forest University regimen is one regimen. Personally, I've not tried it. I use only mitomycin C now. Rare cases of oxaliplatin. And the thing is, with HIPEC, it is not just the dose and concentration, but the perfusion and the temperatures. So the whole technique of HIPEC should be proper. You can choose any drug, any regimen. That is just one part of the procedure. So any comments on that? Would you use some different regimen for this patient? Would you use the high dose of oxaliplatin for this particular patient?
I think Dr. Dev or Rudra.
Yeah. We use usually mitomycin C actually, and we haven't used oxaliplatin, especially in PMPs.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So some people have said that there is no clear-cut evidence for HIPEC. Of course, it is not possible to perform a randomized trial in PMP, but there was this propensity score matched analysis performed by the Sogi group. The full paper has still not been published, but HIPEC was associated with a better overall survival without an increased risk of surgical morbidity. So this is indirect evidence for the benefit of HIPEC in PMP. This patient also had an intra bile duct injury. There was transection of the anterior sectoral duct, and fortunately we identified it during surgery and placed a stent in the right hepatic duct. The patient had a bile leak, and after 10 days, she started developing fever. There were intra-abdominal collections, which we aspirated. The culture was positive. And this is the MRCP showing a leak from the right anterior sectoral duct. So the point to note here is that it is very difficult to re-explore these patients because you've stripped off the peritoneum of the porta. So if you have to go in, it is almost impossible, and that too after 10 days. And most of these leaks heal on their own. So this patient required aspiration a couple of times, but eventually the leak stopped. And after 2 months, her LFTs were absolutely normal. The MRCP was normal, and her CA also came down to 5. Now, the other interesting thing in this patient was that she had this high-grade cytological features with Cushing invasion. So this is one thing very unique about the pathology of PMP, that you see a whole spectrum of changes. Some patients have the majority of the patients have a low-grade PMP with low-grade cytology, but some of them have these high-grade features with Cushing invasion. This is the typical adenocarcinoma. This is a low-grade tumor. This is something in between. It is high-grade with Cushing invasion, and this is what this patient had. Majority of the areas had Cushing invasion, but some areas had adenocarcinoma. So there were foci of adenocarcinoma, and this is the specimen in which you can see the ovarian masses, they look malignant. This area looks malignant, but the rest of it looks the typical low-grade PMP. So this is high-grade disease. We expected it to be low-grade, but it turned out to be high-grade. Now in high-grade PMP with high PCI also, it has been shown that if you obtain a complete cytoreduction, the PCI does not have an impact. So even if the PCI is high and you get a CC0, it is worthwhile performing a surgery. What about the role of chemotherapy in such a patient? The evidence is conflicting. Some studies have shown a benefit, some studies have not shown a benefit. Practically, these patients will recur at 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. At some point of time, they are going to develop recurrence, and the recovery from such a surgery would easily take 1.5 to 2 months. So instead of starting chemotherapy late, another option is to wait for the disease to recur and start chemotherapy. Till now, we did not know what chemotherapy works in these tumors. Now we have this very interesting recent study from Wake Forest University, where it's been shown that there are 3 subtypes of high-grade PMP. There's one subtype called immune enriched that does better than the mixed subtype and the oncogene enriched subtypes. And using this gene signature, we can develop specific systemic therapies. We systematically use FOLFOX and Avastin, FOLFOX with or without Avastin for most of these patients, and we really don't know where it works, where it does not work. So based on this study, in future we may have more specific therapies for these patients. The long-term outcome of this patient, the stoma was reversed at 4 months, and she did not get chemotherapy. At 1 year, the scan was normal. However, at 18 months, she came with obstructive jaundice, and then we gave her some palliative chemo, but in a few months she died. Not all these patients have such a short lifespan. I would say 18 months is short for her. This is another example. A high-grade PMP again underwent palliative debulking, omentectomy and bilateral anteroparietal peritonectomy, received chemotherapy for 2 years. This is the scan 2 years, and at 33 months, he's still alive with disease with a good quality of life. So, in these high grade tumors, mucinous adenocarcinomas of appendiceal origin, high grade PMP, you can get a good survival not just with a CC0 resection, but a palliative debulking and chemotherapy both. So, any final comments on this before I move on to the colorectal cases?
No, I think it was very interesting. The only thing is that had the uh, biliary leak would have been prevented. But when you do such kind of extensive cytoreduction, there are always chances at some point sectoral drugs which are peripheral might get damaged. But because they are only lateral damage and the main drainage is intact, so most of them they heal by secondary healing. And if you could manage to put a stent, then nothing like it.
Yeah. So the good thing was that we identified it during surgery. You know, it was more of an accident. You damage
Yeah.
it and you realize
So,
that it's
so
damaged.
one point to learn is when you do such type of extensive resection in the portal area and the liver, then better to do a methylene blue test to see if there is any kind of leak at the end of the procedure, just like we do after end of hepatic resection.
Just one comment, Dr. Aditi. I think this is a very interesting case. What I see it as mucinous carcinomas. Whenever we are dealing with the mucinous carcinomas of the ovary, most of the time, actually, this is the scenario where almost the entire peritoneum is involved. These patients don't do that good. And what, in your experience, how do you see so far as these subacute intestinal obstructions, or in these cases after doing this kind of the surgery and then the HIPAC, and what is the incidence of SAIO in these cases in your experience? And
So the low grade PMPs, I think the ovarian tumors, they don't do very well. If it's the ovarian mucinous adenocarcinoma with widespread disease, I think it doesn't do very well. Those are very aggressive tumors and they recur very early despite maximal surgery. But these are the appendiceal tumors, the low grade appendiceal primaries. Now we have patients who are disease free for 7 years. We have high grade mucinous tumors, those patients who crossed 5 years. So if you see the SOGI data of nearly 3,000 patients, the median survival for PMP is 8.2 years. The median survival is 16 years and the median disease-free survival is 8 years in that study. Even for the mucinous carcinomas, the high-grade and adenocarcinomas mixed, there is a 5-year survival of 50%. So appendiceal tumors do very well. You don't see those low-grade tumors arising from the ovaries. It's the mucinous adenocarcinomas, and they are aggressive ones. In these patients, we prefer to go all out. And many times, if we don't get a CC0, even with a palliative debulking, you remove 80% of the tumor, don't do any bowel resection, they do well. They are relieved of their symptoms. If it's a high-grade tumor, they are able to tolerate chemotherapy better. You end up giving them symptomatic relief as well as prolonging their lives.
do you think that with that of the, you can say the debulking and then HIPAC, there is going to be a difference if suppose the debulking is not complete?
When we do a debulking, most of the times we do not do a
HIPAC. Yes, this is what I just wanted.
Yes.
Right. The other thing is the incidence of SAIO.
So So SAIU, I mean,
Subacute
it
intestinal
usually,
obstructions. Do you come across this picture of the subacute intestinal obstruction in your patients in the post-operative period?
they do tend to have paralytic ileus. I mean, it is the post-op ileus that is a little more protracted than the routine surgeries, but they rarely develop subacute obstruction. You know, so usually the bowel function returns by the seventh or eighth day. I mean, that's the latest. We do not see to rarely will a patient develop obstruction in the post-operative period.
So, Aditi, I think there are two questions from the audience. One
Yeah.
is by Dr. Jagannath.
Hmm.
Suppose if we have a supradiaphragmatic lymph node,
Hmm.
still you will go for surgery or neoadjuvant?
These patients do not have a supradiaphragmatic lymph node. If it is a CP angle lymph node, in 50% of the cases, it is reactive. And if it is suspicious, I've frankly not seen, I don't remember a patient who had a supradiaphragmatic lymph node in secondary to PMP. I've not seen that. In ovarian cancer, yes, it is there. You can remove the lymph node. If you are doing a radical surgery, you can resect the cardiophrenic angle lymph nodes. Same in peritoneal mesothelioma. That would not be a reason to give NACT.
Yeah. So I think with that we go to the second case.
Okay. So just a minute. So now moving on to the colorectal cases. The first is a 37-year-old unmarried female who had a right ovarian mass, 8 centimeters. It was resected and showed a adenocarcinoma. 2 months later, she developed a left ovarian mass, underwent TAHO and left salpingo-oophorectomy. Subsequently, a laparotomy was performed for drainage of a pelvic abscess. There were adhesions and peritoneal and bowel surface deposits were discovered. There was also a sigmoid colon stricture which turned out to be negative on biopsy. The immunohistochemistry showed peritoneal metastasis of colonic origin. She was started on FOLFOX and cetuximab was added after 3 doses. She had a severe rash but also a complete response after the 4th cycle. So what would be the ideal time to operate on such a patient? Normally in CAOV, we go in for surgery after 3 or 4 cycles. In CA breast, when we give NACT, we tend to give all 6. There is not much clarity on what to do with the colorectal patients. Right now, what most people do is as soon as the disease becomes operable, you go in and operate. In this case, we have a complete response. So perhaps we need a change of strategy, give off all 6 cycles, let the chemotherapy get over and then operate. So all 6 cycles were completed. The PET-CT showed persistence of a complete response. A diagnostic laparoscopy showed only areas of scarring all over the peritoneum. And there was still thickening in the distal sigmoid, which now was positive on a biopsy. So my question to the panelists, what will you do? Will you resect the primary alone, resect the primary and perform HIPEC, resection of primary with CRS and HIPEC, or only CRS?
I think in this case we can do all the three.
Well, yes.
Primary CRS and HIPEC. Yeah.
Yes. So that is what I opted for too. And she underwent resection of the pelvic, anteroparietal, right upper quadrant peritoneum, total appendectomy, total omentectomy, appendicectomy. All the peritoneum was negative and the primary showed a T4 tumor with positive nodes. Again, the same question about HIPEC. This lady I'd operated on 5 years ago. At that time, I gave her oxaliplatin because I used that regimen. Now I think she would receive mitomycin.
Yeah, that's correct actually.
Yes.
Mitomycin
Yes.
now is better.
Probably nobody would opt for oxaliplatin now. So she has been disease-free for 5 years. Then she developed a recurrence in the mesenteric peritoneum and is now on second-line chemotherapy. So this is one example where the patient has widespread peritoneal disease, had a good response to chemotherapy. To be sure that it is a pathological complete response, you have to resect the peritoneum. You just can't see the scarring and say there is no disease. And this is one old study from Gustav Rusi that showed long-term survival is possible in patients with colorectal PN. Patients who are disease-free for 5 years are considered to be cured. And in this series of 107 patients, they had 17 cured patients, of whom 14 patients never developed a recurrence. So moving on to the third case, this is a 64-year-old male, pain and RIF, cecal mass, disseminated peritoneal disease, undergoes a right hemicolectomy. The CA is 54. It is a signet ring cell carcinoma. The patient started on FOLFOX. After 4 months, the CA is down to 4.5. He also has some neuropathy because of the chemotherapy, and the PET CT again is showing a complete response. So what will be the next step? After 4 cycles, will you continue the chemotherapy because it is signet ring, perform CRS and HIPEC or CRS alone, or finish the chemotherapy and perform surgery?
I
So
think
would you-
I think CRS and HIPEC now.
Okay. So you would operate on a patient with a signet ring cell carcinoma. That would not be a reason for you not to operate.
Yeah, correct.
Yes. So this is a lot of people use signet ring cell carcinoma as an exclusion criteria. This is one population-based study from the Netherlands that showed the benefit of CRS and HIPEC in patients with signet ring cell carcinoma. Median survival of 9 months with chemotherapy alone versus 20 months with CRS and HIPEC. So she underwent cytoreductive surgery and HIPEC, PCI 17. These were the procedures performed, and this is what it looks like intraoperatively. Now, I would be highly suspicious that this is disease, but on pathology, all this came out to be negative. So this is one score that we often use to select patients for surgery in colorectal PN, called the peritoneal surface disease severity score. And it looks at the clinical symptoms, PCI and histology. Signet ring is given a very high score of 9 points. And you can see the stage-wise survival here. For stage 4, the survival is very less. So if you consider the surgical PCI, she would get a 9 for this, P for this, and 0 for symptoms. So the score would be 12, it would be stage 4. But if you see the radiological PCI, it is a stage 3. Maybe the survival is better. On pathology, she had a complete response, no adverse molecular features. He completed FOLFOX, was disease-free for 15 months post completion of chemotherapy. Now he's developed a rise in CA, and we are planning treatment. The message I want to give is this is a paper that has recently been published in colorectal disease. And we found that the radiological and surgical PCI correlate in less than 65%. Similarly, radiological and pathological PCI in 70%, and the surgical and pathological PCI in 68%. So when you base your decisions just on PCI, a lot of times you may be misled. You should not just look at the PCI, but the overall clinical picture. And then there is the KRAS mutations in colorectal cancer, again, something associated with a poorer survival. In the same score, if there is a KRAS mutation, even a low PCI, it is stage 3. But if you see the absolute survival, this is another study. KRAS mutated tumors with CRS and HIPEC have a median survival of 38 months. So it is not, of course, a KRAS mutated tumor will do worse than the wild type. We all know that. But you should not just compare with better prognostic groups. On its own, also, it is a good survival for stage 4 disease with KRAS mutations. And you should compare this survival with what is obtained with systemic chemo alone. If you don't operate on these patients, are you going to get this median survival of 38 months? Perhaps not. The other thing about all these scores is that there is no consideration given to the response to systemic chemotherapy. So we created this algorithm for treating patients with colorectal PM. Most of the patients in this algorithm would get neoadjuvant chemotherapy unless it is very limited disease. And we use the PCI, but not very strictly. Even if the PCI is high, but there is no diffuse small bowel involvement, the patient will benefit from surgery. This is a very interesting paper by Paul Sugarbaker published in our IJSO, in which he said that if the patients have a complete response to systemic chemo, the role of HIPEC may be diminished. But in the recent results of the CARO 6%, it is not 10%, it is 30%. So that is the benefit of using NACT. You can get a complete response and a prolonged survival as you do in the primary, where the approach is now shifting to total neoadjuvant therapy. Patients who do not have a response or have stable disease benefit from resection and HIPEC if you change the drug. And patients who have a partial response benefit from CRS and HIPEC. So if you look at systemic therapy versus HIPEC for colorectal PM, systemic therapy should be used for all patients. You cannot treat colorectal peritoneal metastasis with CRS and HIPEC alone. Though the results of the CARO 6 are not published, unless there is some proof that CRS and HIPEC alone is enough, that is not a treatment strategy to be followed. And with the negative results of the PRODIGE 7, whom would you perform HIPEC for? Perhaps patients with a PCI of more than 10 who have not a very good response to systemic chemotherapy. If the patient is having a complete or near complete response to systemic chemotherapy, the benefit of HIPEC is diminished. And patients with mucinous histology, of course, extrapolating from PMP. So,
in between, we can take some questions. I think there are some questions from Dr. Pankaj Pandey. That how do you follow up such cases?
We perform a routine follow-up for these patients, CA or any CA, CA99, whatever was raised every 3 months, and imaging depending on the rise in CA. They would have some, they would have a CT scan or a PET CT at least every 6 months. We would not, if required, every 3 months or at least every 6 months.
Yeah.
For the first, yeah.
Yeah, the next question is by Dr. Aswini Sachdev. What is your experience on repeat HIPEC after finding a recurrence, and what is the minimum gap you have operated?
Minimum gap. So it depends on, it differs from disease to disease. At least a gap of 6 months between the first and second HIPEC. I would need a very strong reason to do another HIPEC in the same patient unless I'm dealing with PMP or mesothelioma. Those two diseases are the ones where a repeat HIPEC has a strong role. If it is colorectal peritoneal carcinomatosis, at least a gap of 12 to 18 months. There is a large SOGI study of 180 patients that showed when the disease recurred after 12 months, there was a survival benefit. And we have to understand for colorectal cancer, these patients they get a lot of chemotherapy. The patients who do well, if you see the French results, which show perhaps the highest survival, those patients they receive FOLFIRINOX, they receive all the biological therapies. So it depends on how much chemotherapy the patient can tolerate or how much they can afford. It is an expensive affair in colorectal PM. Regarding ovarian cancer, personally, I would never do a repeat HIPEC in ovarian cancer. We do HIPEC only for interval CRS. For current disease, there isn't much evidence. During interval CRS, we do a total parietal peritonectomy. So going in those patients, I would need a strong reason. Unless the disease is very localized, has recurred after a long time, I would not operate. And at that time, perhaps a HIPEC. If somebody has been disease free for 2 years or 3 years, has a limited recurrence, then maybe I would do a HIPEC. But in ovarian cancer, I would be in more on systemic therapies for recurrent disease. A CRS, of course, I'm not too convinced about the role of HIPEC.
Yeah. So there is another question from Dr. Jagannath. How many percentage of cases you have adenocarcinoma with PMP?
Adenocarcinoma, roughly 20 to 25%. High grade PMP. Till recently, we were not distinguishing the high grade with pushing invasion from adenocarcinoma. So they are all clubbed together as high grade PMP.
So Dr. Amish, if you are there, then do you think that the surgeons are dominating? So any comments on your second line, third line should be used rather than HIPEC?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. See, in terms of pseudomyxoma peritonei, I have nothing to say as a medical oncologist. If it is high grade, then yes, there is some role of chemotherapy, although in my personal experience, I don't see much response other than stable disease. But as Dr. Aditi said, in terms of ovarian cancer, I seriously have, I have not come across any HIPAC paper which tells me that in the era of molecular oncology, in era of homologous repair gene deficiency and BRCA1, BRCA2, even though if you have only a surface nodule, how much HIPAC would benefit, it actually a very, very major surgery. In terms of colorectal cancer, I would say that we need, of course, there is a good data of, there's a GIMSA study where they did a FOLFIRINOX followed by HIPAC and they showed some good results. So that is the place where we get frustrated when in colorectal cancer, when abdomen is full of disease. Liver limited disease, we have a lot of data, but abdominal full disease, peritoneal disease, I would say is that more data is required instead of just going for only systemic or going only for HIPAC. So I don't think surgeons are dominating in this sphere. More and more technology gives us better and better results. Patients live longer. That is more important. These would be my comments. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So outcome is the key. So Dr. Aditi, we move on to the next case.
Yeah. So now moving on to ovarian cancer. The first one is a 47-year-old female with low-grade serous carcinoma, gross ascites and a left pleural effusion, which is cytology positive. These are some of the images. She received 3 cycles of NACT. There was some symptomatic improvement and the CA-125 reduced from 515 to 213. The CT showed resolution of the pleural effusion, but the ascites remained. The peritoneal disease was almost as it is, but resectable. There was pleural thickening. There was persistent pleural thickening on the left side. So what would be the role of thoracoscopy in such a person, in such a patient? If you are planning a curative surgery in the abdomen, if there is some persistent pleural thickening, would you explore that or would you leave that alone?
No, I think it can be done simultaneously with thoracoscopy. And if there are limited disease, then that can be also dealt.
Yes. So we did that. We did a bilateral thoracoscopy. There was residual disease on the left side that was positive. The right side showed no residual disease. Biopsies were negative. So the surgical plan was to do an abdominal surgery and assess the left side, but not the right side. I think the images are not there in this one. Okay. So the patient had a TPP, TH, BSO, LAR and all these procedures and a left thoracoscopic pleurectomy. So would you perform HIPEC for such a patient where you've done an extensive abdominal surgery, there is pleural disease? Because we know the Dutch trial is only for 3C, it does not address 4A and this becomes 4A. So Any thoughts
I don't think so. I don't think so. There is any role in stage 4 disease to go for the HIPAC, because we are basically trying to address the intraperitoneal, you can say the intraperitoneal metastatic disease. We are not aiming at the organs other than this, but yes, there have been some of the studies which are looking into going for the HIPAC, rather including the pleural cavity also, actually, for the HIPAC after whatever the excision of the pleura. So, but these are only the anecdotal cases, but there is usually whatever the evidence we have, we do not perform HIPAC for stage 4 disease.
Yeah. So I agree with that, and sometimes it also depends on what the patient wants. Sometimes patients want it. It's a young patient. You push the limits and do it. This particular patient was the relative of a medical oncologist, and she did not believe in HIPEC, so there was no HIPEC for this patient. The patient recovered uneventfully, but she developed ascites.
Dr. Aditi, Dr. Vora here. Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes,
To
doctor.
you and Dr. Rama Joshi and all the surgeons, if this would have been stage 3C and not stage 4A, this is just neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery, if I am right and if I have understood correctly.
Correct.
Which patients would you insist on HIPAC in these primary scenario, assuming it is stage 3C?
See, in this kind of a situation, whatever the kind of the picture Dr. Aditi has shown, of course, it was only the pleural effusion, but what you are saying that let us go for the scenario where we think that the disease is limited to the peritoneal cavity. I take it as stage 3C disease, and this was definitely operable for that of the primary surgical cytoreduction. I will opt for the primary surgical cytoreduction and then go for the adjuvant chemotherapy. This will be my call on this patient.
No, I am asking, ma'am, which patients? I understand this is the routine practice, what we do in day-to-day basis. Which patients would oncosurgeons insist on HIPAC? What are the tumor characteristics which are there? Because there is, I don't see there is any data which will improve the survival in the primary setting of ovarian cancer HIPAC.
There is one Vendreal trial, if suppose you have looked into, that shows the improvements in the overall survival by about say 10%. And these are basically the patient, we are concerned about the overall survival. Of course, the progression-free survival, there was not much of the advantage in that. And I think we are having more and more evidence towards that of the HIPAC. Definitely the peritoneal relapse of the disease is very high in these patients. And to address that issue, that is why the HIPAC, peritoneectomy and HIPAC has got a role in the ovarian cancer, as we are doing the cytoreduction. Cytoreduction has been correlated well with that of the status of the residual disease. If suppose the residual disease is measurable, then the likely chance of the survival is going to be low, despite of the adjuvant chemotherapy. So I think we agree with this concept. The thing is that once we are going for the complete cytoreduction, we are addressing onto the microscopic disease, onto the peritoneal surface as well as the intraperitoneal organs. And also the cells which get, I mean to say, the cells which are free within the peritoneal cavity, these are addressed by that of the, you can say, HIPAC. And this is the concept which is very much acceptable. And I basically believe in it that once the cytoreduction, if we believe, I think we believe in the HIPAC too.
I agree with that. That HIPEC has a very strong rationale in ovarian cancer because cisplatin is a super drug for hypothermia. You increase the heat and the cisplatin deals with all the platinum resistant disease, the microscopic disease. So there is a very strong therapeutic rationale. The thing is, in the primary setting, upfront surgery, it has no role. There is no evidence as of now. The OV-HIPEC 2 trial would answer that question, and it is already underway. For the interval setting, we have the OV-HIPEC 1 trial that showed a benefit. But there are still some questions to be answered. If somebody has very chemosensitive disease, the CA125 becomes less than 5. You see a complete response. Perhaps that is the patient where the benefit of HIPEC will be very less. The other important thing is that these patients have to get back onto chemotherapy on time. HIPEC is not a replacement for systemic chemotherapy. So if there is extensive disease during interval cytoreduction, you are not sure of you are not sure of having a low morbidity, it's better not to perform the HIPEC so that the patient can start systemic chemotherapy on time. That is at least my approach. If it is a young patient who can withstand extensive surgery and HIPEC, I would push that patient for HIPEC. But where the patient is not convinced, cost is an issue, morbidity is an issue, I have little hesitation in refusing a HIPEC and just performing a very good cytoreduction. For the recurrent setting, again, I'm very selective. It is not that a recurrent case would get a HIPEC. So that's it.
Dr. Aditi, we will take up two audience questions. One is that Dr. Deep is asking, have you done any HIPEC in pediatric patients? Like 12 years or like that?
The youngest patient I have done HIPEC for is a 18-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question was by Dr. Manish, who quoted the FORDRIS 7 trial. And he said that if there is a recurrence and you are going for a second HIPEC, will you go for the same chemotherapy or will you change?
So currently, if you've used oxaliplatin first, obviously you will use mitomycin C. Now there is this concept of organoids. They are developing these organoids where you can actually test the chemosensitivity and then use that particular drug for HIPEC. Some people are using cisplatin because cisplatin has worked very well in ovarian cancer for those recurrent cases. There are some people who use melphalan. I'm not sure if it's ever been used for colorectal cancer, but in appendiceal tumors, a re-HIPEC with melphalan did not show any benefit over using mitomycin C or oxaliplatin. So really, there is no clear answer to that question. You can use this Wake Forest University regimen of 200 milligram per meter square, or you can just use mitomycin C again. It depends on the recurrence. If you've resected very limited disease in one area and the disease recurs in another area, if the disease-free interval is long, you can easily use the same drug. Like you reintroduce the same systemic therapy if the treatment-free interval is long. The same concept can be applied to HIPEC as well.
Thank you. So we have more another 5 minutes. So we quickly go to the case number 5.
Yeah, so this one was, this patient started on second-line chemotherapy with Lipidox, carboplatin, subsequently Avastin. It was strongly hormone positive. At 8 months, she is asymptomatic. So what I wanted to highlight is aggressive surgery in these low-grade tumors has a role. Eventually, we were able to make her symptom-free. This is the 5th case, a 68-year-old lady, huge ascites, loss of appetite, weakness, omental and peritoneal deposits, BRCA non-mutated, CA125 277, and these are the images. This is another video that you can see. This is all the disease. There is a lot of small bowel disease also in this. So she received 3 cycles of chemotherapy. CA125 reduced to 54, but no reduction in ascites, and there was minimal reduction of peritoneal disease. It was as it is. So what would you do at this stage? You are likely not to get a CC0. Would you still assess for operability and operate, start second-line chemotherapy, or consider something as experimental as PIPAC?
I think she should be given the benefit of surgery. Definitely she requires exploration sometimes on imaging. I don't think so. Whatever my experience says that yes, sometimes on imaging we think that the things are not going to do that good. But even when we open up and spend a lot of time, I think we are able to do justice to that surgery, and the cytoreduction will definitely help rather than deciding for just the second line of the chemotherapy or the PIPAC.
Yes, so we went away with the same strategy. there was disease on a diglap on the small bowel, but we still decided to debulk and give her a maximum cytoreduction. The PCI was 37. There was infiltration of the rectosigmoid. This is the disease. You can see a lot of serosal nodules. So she had all these resections. We avoided performing a total colectomy because there was a lot of residual disease on the small bowel, and it was a CC2 resection. Would be still considered optimal debulking by GOG standards? Would you perform a HIPEC in such a patient?
No, I will not perform HIPEC in this patient.
Yes, so that was my decision too, to avoid HIPEC in this patient. So what about, she recovered uneventfully from the surgery. So what about further therapy? Would you continue with the same drugs, start second line therapy with Avastin, or since it is ER/PR positive, give hormone therapy alone in this scenario? Clearly, chemotherapy has reduced the CA-125, but morphologically the disease has not gone away, and on pathology also it is a CR chemotherapy response score of 1. There is no response to chemotherapy.
I think Amish can take up that.
Second line chemotherapy, and Amish is the right person.
No, so the unfortunately, like in breast or few other tumors, pathological CR is hardly seen in ovarian cancer with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. You always would have a disease left behind, and that's why complete or optimal cytoreduction is something which the definitions have come. There is no role at this point of time of addition of Avastin or changing chemotherapy. There is no data suggestive. Although we would love to change, because knowing the very fact that disease was there rampant in abdomen, but there is no data per se to add Avastin or switch to hormone therapy alone. I think we would continue the same drugs. In this particular patient, I would be very much tempted to do BRCA1, BRCA2 and homologous repair gene deficiency, which is now available.
It's all negative. There is no germline or somatic mutation. No
if
BRCA.
Everything is negative, then in this particular patient, I wish I would have started Avastin earlier. Then I would have continued chemotherapy with Avastin and then continued Avastin as a maintenance treatment. But first 3 cycles, if there is no Avastin, there is no data that addition of Avastin will do anything great in this patient. So complete 3 more cycles of chemotherapy and wait for follow-up.
Okay.
After the completion of chemotherapy, do you think that she can be put onto the hormonal therapy?
Ma'am, again, tempted to do that all the time tempted to do, because we all know that these patients are not going to do well. There is some data now which has come that maintenance hormone makes benefit. Well, it is not something which is category 1, category 2A. But yes, I think I would speak to patient and I will tell patient that it may help, may not help. If you want me to put you on maintenance, I may prefer that. Although there is no strong data, but you are absolutely right, ma'am. We are all tempted to do that.
So the patient receives second line therapy and Avastin was added by the medical oncologist. So for HIPEC in ovarian cancer, again, to reiterate, primary CRS no, interval yes, for selected patients, recurrence yes or no. It is again very important to start chemotherapy on time. I have burnt my fingers many times when people have believed that HIPEC can avoid chemotherapy. Patients have not started chemotherapy and the disease has come back. So if you anticipate morbidity, avoid HIPEC, just do a good CRS. The other concern is the dose, 100 milligram per meter square in the Vandriel trial. To give that dose, you need sodium thiosulfate, which is not available in India. Some people use amifostin. Personally, I would do a 75 milligram per meter square at a high temperature, because cisplatin the toxicity gets augmented with hypothermia. So instead of giving a higher dose of cisplatin at a lower temperature, I would give a lower dose of cisplatin at a higher temperature. So another very burning question, very important question in ovarian cancer. This is a patient post NSCT. This is the disease. Will you resect the rectum here or not?
Of course, she should go for the you can say the modified posterior exentration. We can go
Yeah.
for the section of this part of the segment of the rectus sigmoid, and then we can go for anastomosis.
Yeah, so we had a vote on this on one social media forum, and half the participants said no, this does not require resection. So when we discussed HIPEC and no HIPEC, currently the discussion should also be around how much peritoneum to resect. And I would resect the entire pelvic peritoneum in this patient, because a lot of times you will find disease here, especially if this patient is post chemotherapy. So, and this patient did have residual disease on pathology in the rectal nodules. So instead of just focusing on HIPEC, I think we have to look at the peritoneal resection in ovarian cancer. It has to be more extensive, and we have to resect at least all the scars post chemotherapy, if not remove the entire peritoneum. And this was a paper we published on the extent of, this was a review on the extent of peritoneal resection that is required for different primary malignancies. So that ends my presentation. We have 2 books. If you want an ebook, you can send me a request. And our Indian HIPEC registry now has more than 1,200 patients. A good contribution from AIMS, that fantastic database that you saw. The AIMS has a very good database, one of the best databases, and I invite you all to contribute to the registry. Thank you.
Yeah, I think 1 or 2 questions are there. One by Dr. Dharma is that how many blood transfusion have you given during a HIPEC?
How many maximum number you need?
Yeah, maximum.
10 or 12 for a huge PMP?
Yeah, huge PMP, especially when you have suprahepatic, subdiaphragmatic, huge lesions with liver capsule involvement. There you will have the maximum bleeding. So you can might have to give the blood transfusion. And have you ever used a thromboelastogram or something to see for the hemostasis impairment?
We really not had the need to do that in any of our patients. Usually the normal parameters are sufficient, and we use albumin, we use goal-directed fluid therapy. We are a little bit liberal on replacement of blood. We have it available. If required, we would do it, but not for every case.
Yeah, I think anesthesis plays a very important role. And recently, Aditi had a good paper for onco-anesthesia during HIPEC, and that paper was also very good in writing every aspect of the hemodynamic instability during the HIPEC surgery.
That paper is by Dr. Sohan from Tata Memorial. Dr. Sohan.
Yeah, correct.